I don't think it's radical to ask senators to vote. I don't think it's radical to expect senators to fulfill their constitutional responsibilities.
In the spring of 2005, Senate Republicans, led by then Majority Leader Bill Frist, started talking about something called the nuclear option. The nuclear option was a put-up-or-shut-up ultimatum to Senate Democrats. Allow up or down no filibuster votes on President Bush's judicial nominees, or else Republicans would kill the filibuster. They would just get rid of it. Well, now, Republicans never really had to go nuclear because Democrats were very afraid of this threat. Some of them went into I'm afraid deal-making mode at the time. 14 senators, 7 Republicans and 7 Democrats, then struck a deal to allow President Bush's judicial nominees to go forward. Crisis averted, the filibuster lived, Bush got his judges, and Democrats kept the filibuster alive, although they promised not to use it very much. Great deal, right? When Republicans threatened to go nuclear on Democrats back then, it's because Democrats, they said, were abusing the filibuster. Here's what that looked like in that Congress. 54 filibusters when Democrats were in the minority at that time. Then when the Republicans became the minority in 2007, boing, 112 filibusters. Republicans now have a de facto standing filibuster on practically everything. They've made it so that passing anything in the Senate requires 60 votes, a supermajority every time. This situation has never existed before. This was not the situation in any previous Congress ever. Really. I know that Beltway reporting always makes it seem like 60 is normal. This is the way it's always been. Democrats did it too when they were in the minority. It is not true. This really has never happened before in the history of the U.S. Senate. When Republicans were mad about Democratic filibusters in 2005 and they threatened to kill the filibuster altogether, Democrats were doing nothing anywhere near as extreme as what is being done now. And so, finally, after starting to figure out that maybe this is a problem, it's Democrats now who are coming around to a nuclear state of mind.
I've never seen a time when the operating norm to get anything passed was a supermajority of 60 votes. No matter what the bill is, it's filibustered. It's required to get 60 votes. You can't rule by a supermajority. You can't govern if you require a supermajority.
That man is both the vice president and the president of the Senate, don't forget, who would have a key role to play in setting or changing Senate rules. Even longtime defenders of the filibuster, like Democrat Chris Dodd of Connecticut, are now acknowledging that the Senate has become, in Senator Dodd's words, a dysfunctional institution, describing Republicans' current use of the filibuster as abusive. Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is also sounding the alarm, telling Roll Call newspaper a constitutional majority is 51 votes. Is there never anything that can be done without 60 votes? It isn't legitimate in terms of passing legislation. Speaker Pelosi noted that more than 200 bills that have passed the House are bottled up in the Senate now, a vast majority of which got more than 50 Republican votes when they passed the House. Today we moved a bit beyond just complaining about this state of affairs towards some action to fix it. Democratic Senators Tom Harkin and Jeanne Shaheen introduced legislation to change the filibuster rules in the Senate finally. Under the proposal, if 60 votes couldn't be achieved to break a filibuster, then after 2 days, that threshold would drop to 57 votes. 2 days later, it would drop to 54 votes. 2 days later, it would drop to a simple majority of 51 votes needed to break a filibuster.
The abuse of the filibuster by Republicans is unprecedented. It has become routine. It's become increasingly reckless. It is wrecking our nation. The filibuster is tearing apart the glue that holds our nation together.
So says Democrat Tom Harkin now. And as the Republicans get ready to cry foul over what Senator Harkin is trying to do, they should first check the archives of themselves from back when they tried to go nuclear just a few years ago.
Let's get back to the way the Senate operated for over 200 years, up or down votes on the president's nominee, no matter who the president is, no matter who's in control of the Senate.
This week, President Obama suggested that he may try to appoint his National Labor Relations Board Excuse me. Can we back up for a second? Thank you very much. Keep going. Thank you very much. Senator McConnell, they're calling for up or down votes on nominees, no matter who's in control. This week, President Obama's nominee to head up the National Labor Relations Board went before the Senate. His nomination was killed when 33 senators voted to filibuster him. 33 senators voting to block an up or down vote, including Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Up or down votes on the president's nominee, no matter who the president is, no matter who's in control of the Senate.
Starts with H, 4 syllables, rhymes with zipocracy. When President Obama suggested this week that he may try to appoint his labor relations nominee anyway when the Senate is in recess, Republican Senator Orrin Hatch objected, saying, quote, "I sincerely hope the White House does not circumvent the will of the Senate by appointing him when the Senate is out of session." And by the will of the Senate, Senator Hatch means the 33 out of 100 senators who voted no, not the 52 who voted yes. That's what's considered the will of the Senate now, unless it really is time to go nuclear. Joining us now is someone whom I suspect may disagree with me on this. Former chairman of the Democratic Party, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. Governor Dean, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
I only mildly disagree, Rachel. I'm always in favor of anything nuclear involving Republicans. I mean, they are so irresponsible. They really, honestly, I've said this for a long time. They put the good of their party ahead of the good of the country, and when that happens, they don't deserve to serve in office anymore. And I think we're there now. The only regret that I have is the filibuster has been useful when we've had to stop extremists, ideologues, such as some of the people on the Supreme Court that decided corporations giving money to influence politics in this country was a good idea last week. And so we do need to block some of these extremist activist judges that the Republicans put on the Supreme Court from time to time. So someday we'll be in the minority again. I hope it won't be soon. And we want to think about that before we get rid of the filibuster. But I do think that the Republicans are so irresponsible that we just may have no choice whatsoever than have a wholesale reform of the Senate rules.
Democrats are in charge now. Republican filibuster abuse is off the charts. What Republicans were complaining about when they were trying to get rid of the filibuster, then they were describing what was going on then as extreme, just absolutely has no comparison to what's happening now. It just doesn't seem like there's any accountability for that unless Democrats play hardball.
I think that's true, Rachel. I mean, it's too bad, really, but the Republicans have decided to wreck the system in order to get their way, and I think that's bad for the country, and I think the country comes first. So even though having a filibuster would help us in the long run if we get back into the minority, which statistically someday we're likely to do, hopefully not soon, I think for the good of the country we probably have to go forward, eliminate the filibuster. The other thing we've got to do is eliminate this ridiculous hold process. You know, Richard Shelby has holds on 80 people simply because he wants some pork for his home district. Right. Here the Republicans are screaming and yelling about pork and earmarks, and they're holding up 80 people simply so Senator Shelby can get some more pork and earmarks. This is a bad scene for the country, so probably it has to be cleaned up.
And Senator Shelby did ultimately drop that. Now he's just holding 3
Rachel,
people.
He only dropped it after it was exposed on CBS News, and his own constituents were disgusted with him.
Well, I think that's part of the importance of this issue here. I mean, you are famously author of the 50-state strategy that helped Democrats swamp Republicans in 2006. In terms of political strategy, looking ahead to 2010, can Democrats talking about Republican obstruction, things like what Shelby did, things like filibuster abuse, Democrats talking about what Republicans are doing wrong in the Senate, does that reap electoral gains?
It will help some, focusing on Republican obstructionism, because the Republicans are obstructionists. They have nothing to offer. They haven't offered anything.
But complaining about the way they're doing stuff in Washington sort of seems like weak sauce
It's
to me.
not enough.
Yeah.
Well, our problem is we're not tough enough. If George Bush had been president of the United States and wanted health care reform, an unlikely scenario, but if he'd wanted it, it would have been on his desk in 8 months by August, because George Bush used reconciliation, the budget process, to get past everything with 51 votes 5 times. We haven't used it once. We haven't shown the spine to do that. And we need, once again, a spinal transplant in the Democratic Party to play hardball. This is what the country's at stake here. This is not about Democrat versus Republican anymore. This is about whether we want to move forward and have real reform, or they want to let a small ideological obstructionist minority screw up the country so they can take power again. And I don't think we ought to put up with that.
You wrote an open letter that I saw on Daily Kos this week titled, "You Still Have the Power," sort of a pep talk pep talk for progressives. If you were DNC chair right now, what would priority number one be for you in terms of re-energizing the progressive base? Would it be just getting something passed, using reconciliation, moving against the filibuster?
Yeah, we've got it. We've got to get something passed. You can't run an election without anything passed. One of the biggest problems in the health care bill is it doesn't go into effect until 2013. We need something that's going to go in effect by 2010. Where obviously it's too late for comprehensive health care reform, but we still can move forward with some significant reform, but it has to be in effect in 2010 so we can go to the folks and say, see those guys? They filibustered and brought the Senate to a standstill to bring pork to Alabama. We got you some health care reform. We didn't get everything you wanted because they stopped it, but we got you some health care reform.
And the first half of that is nowhere near as powerful unless you've got the second half of that, too, which is here's what we delivered.
But fundamentally, for the sake of the Republic, we got to reform the Senate because, as Chris Dodd said, it's a failed institution at this point.
No, you didn't disagree with me after all.
I didn't.
Thank you. Howard Dean, former chairman of the Democratic Party, former Vermont governor. Thanks. It's always good to see you.
My pleasure.
Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Rachel.